So yeah, thank you very much indeed for asking me to share about the National Digital Twin Programme. And what I'd like to do really is set a bit of context for it, kind of set the high-level introduction to it, explain what on earth it is, what do we mean by a National Digital Twin, and in order to do that, I'll need to dig a little bit into explaining what a digital twin is. And I'm hoping that this won't then create a trigger for our next speaker, which you'll hear all about. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about what we're doing about it within the CDBB to actually deliver this this major national programme. So to start setting the context, I guess I should begin with the beginning, and that is this report that came out from the National Infrastructure Commission a couple of years back. If you've not seen it, I would really commend it to you. It's a visionary report that is really quite wide-ranging, looking at what it is in our sector that can make the biggest difference going forwards. And what they've come up with are these 3 high-level recommendations. And so number 1 is that we as a nation should move towards having a national digital twin. And I'll explain in a bit what we mean by that. That in order to enable that, we should set up an information management framework for the built environment. And again, I'll explain a bit more about that. And then in order to enable that, we should pull together people from across government and academia and industry so that we can align and genuinely pull in the same direction so that we can deliver the information management framework so that we can enable the national digital twin. So they're very nicely nested recommendations, and that's really kicked off the whole work that we're now doing. And I guess what that means, if we boil it down to what CDBB is actually doing here, we have to deliver the information management framework, and we've got a role to help align the industry and bring us together on this journey, and then we've got a role to enable the national digital twin. But just to be clear, CDBB won't be building the national digital twin. What we're doing is providing what's needed to enable others to pull it together and build it. So this is all in pursuance of a grand vision for Digital Built Britain. And as you probably know, the Centre for Digital Built Britain are effectively the guardians and owners of this vision. CDBB was set up by BEIS, and it is a partnership between BEIS and Cambridge University. And what it does really is build on the fantastic work that has been done in this country in the BIM space. And I think without that foundational work, there's no way that we could imagine forwards towards this Digital Built Britain. And so I see BIM as an essential foundation for what we can now imagine as we move forwards. And as you probably know, there's been a lot of focus in the BIM world on design and build, and that's the first part of the vision. We know that there's further to go. We know that there's more value that can be unlocked. You know, we know that if we properly adopt the UK BIM framework, that it will unlock immense amounts of more value. But what I think we can say is that it has already created a fantastic foundation to move forwards. And as we move forwards, we can clearly see the information management thinking extending into operation, but then we can go beyond that as well and start to imagine what would happen if we're integrating information across the built environment. And that's where the integration phase comes in. And so this integration speaks to being able to make connections, not just across organizational boundaries, but across sector boundaries as well. And I'll dig into that in a bit too. So you can see that this is a very big vision. It's not going to come about overnight, but we've made a really good start on it, and we have the foundations in place. And so if I do continue to set the context, but really start to talk about the connections that we can see within the built environment and how we can model those. So the context I'd like to set here really is about our big infrastructure sectors and how they're connected together. If we think about transport alone, it's a huge, complex, interconnected system already. And just looking at our rail system, it's huge and complex and interconnected. But then it becomes even more complex and interconnected when we consider road and air. And you know, as a transport system, we can see all sorts of potential connections there. It's a complex, interconnected system. We can see the same kind of thing in energy, in the energy sector. A large, complex, interconnected system, which is becoming more complex and more interconnected as we move towards having prosumers, distributed energy generation, etc. And we can see that energy is a sector that is basically connected into every other sector. As we move towards having electric vehicles, for example, it will become difficult to see where transport ends and energy begins, that they're connected. Similarly for telecoms, it's another one of these sectors, huge, complex, interconnected, and connects into pretty much all of the other sectors and enables them to work. A similar thing for water, quite often out of sight and out of mind, but an essential service nevertheless, a complex interconnected system that relies on water and telecoms and transport. You can see it's a similar story for waste. And I suggest that even though waste might not be seen yet as a fully connected system, that as we do move towards a circular economy and we stop seeing waste as waste, but we start seeing it as a resource, then it'll be coming back at us in the system as future materials. And so you can see that the connections there will become greater and can be exploited. That's not the end of the story of these interconnections, because we've got our social infrastructure, hospitals, prisons and schools, none of which would operate unless all the ones we've already been through would work. And then on top of that, we've got our residential, commercial and industrial buildings. Again, that doesn't work unless we have our infrastructure serving them properly. And so what happens when we add all of these up? Sorry, I've got one more to go, which is to say that all of those have some kind of complex interface with the natural environment, which itself is a complex interconnected system. So the picture I've been trying to draw really is that each individual layer is a complex interconnected system, but they all come together in our built environment, which is this most amazing machine that we've built for ourselves that serves society to help make our lives better. But very often we don't see it as a system. We don't operate it as a system. We don't have strategy for it to kind of work it as a system. But the fact is that it is connected together. And so what we could describe it as is a system of systems. And the reason for me maybe labouring this point is to say that this is what we're dealing with when it comes to the vision for Digital Built Britain and the National Digital Twin. So we're not just talking about twins of new stuff. We're talking about the whole of the built environment, and we're talking about all of those complex connections that sit within it. And this is enshrined, I was very, very grateful for this being mentioned a little bit earlier on, in the thinking of Flourishing Systems. And if you've not seen this paper, I'd commend it to you. It's an easy read, it's pretty short, but it really does try to pick up on these issues and focused in two areas. The people focus, to say that it's really all about people, it's all about outcomes. That's what we're trying to drive. We're trying to help people to flourish. But that we have a system of systems as an amazing machine to enable that to happen, and therefore we should deal with it as such. And it's in this context that I think that the National Digital Twin can be of great service, because it's a tool that is fit for purpose for helping to manage the system optimally in the service of people. And so if we do buy that argument that the system matters and it's in service of people, then probably we should see the system processes and the asset lifecycle with different eyes, because very often in our industry we tend to focus on the delivery of new assets, and we see that our processes kind of start with planning, and we get into design and build and then commission, and kind of think that the job's done then. But in reality, if we're seeing the system and seeing it serving people, then the most important process is the use. It's the use of the system. And then we have got other system processes which basically have to go on forever as long as we want the system to work and society to continue, which is the operate and maintain, which enables the use. And then every now and again, what the system requires is an intervention to deliver a new asset or to do some work on an existing asset, and then that kicks off the planning and the design and the build. And so we can see the asset delivery processes in the context of much bigger system processes. And I think when we see this, we can see where the opportunities are for digital twins in the built environment. Because basically what digital twins do is enable us to make better decisions in our processes. And so if we can see all the decisions which happen across this diagram, then we can see where we unlock the value. So in other words, we would be making better use decisions, better operation and maintenance decisions, better planning decisions, better design decisions, better construction decisions, and better commissioning decisions. And that's really what digital twins and connected digital twins are about. We see it's really those better decisions that are at the core of unlocking the value. And this is really to create, if my move on button would work. I'm now scared that it's going to jump a couple of slides at once. Okay, so what we see here is the cyber physical system. Again, we can't even see the cyber physical system if we haven't taken on board the system point. But what this is really talking about is applying Industry 4.0 thinking to our infrastructure. And what this is saying is that digital assets have genuine value. We know that physical assets have genuine value, and we bring them together, and that will unlock more value for the people that the infrastructure serves. I've already mentioned where we think the value comes from. It comes from these better decisions. And so understanding the value chain is important in that. Where we see data coming in from the environment, we have to do something with that data to make it fit for use, which means cleansing the data, structuring it properly, doing something to assure its quality. But that just keeps it as data. And in order to get value from it, we have to make sense of it. And making sense of it is where we bring in our analytics and our models to help generate insight from the basic data. And we'll know that that insight is of greater value than the data from which it was derived. And we use that insight then to drive these better decisions. So that's all very nice and very theoretical. But if we have brought the argument that better decisions will unlock this untold value across the whole of infrastructure, both in the delivery of it and the operation, maintenance and use of it, then this really matters. What it tells us is that there's a direct connection between data and outcomes, and at the heart of it is decisions. Okay, so that's enough of the context, I hope. What we can now do is introduce the digital twin itself. And what you'll see here is that that information value chain is neatly wrapped around the definition of the digital twin, where we see the physical thing, the asset, process or system, modeled by something digital, that's the digital twin. But what makes it a twin is the connection. It's the data connection between the digital model and the physical thing. And then we can see that taking data from the physical side enables us to generate those insights, which facilitates the better decisions, which then drives the better interventions and leads to the outcomes. And so that's really at the heart of what a digital twin is and where the value can come from. Now, there's all sorts of different potential digital twins at all sorts of different scales, but I think at their heart they'll always be revolving around this in some way or other. So you can imagine a digital twin just of a single asset, which could be used for helping to optimize operation. You could also imagine a digital twin of a whole network, which is being used to facilitate better planning decisions. They're both digital twins. They're both based on the same premise, but obviously they're at different scales and use different timescales. So now we have introduced what a digital twin is. What about connecting them up? What happens if we can see the value of individual digital twins? And it might make sense to have an individual digital twin of the train itself, which helps us to make sure that the train never breaks down, because we've already understood what needs to be maintained before it breaks down. That's a great idea. We've got a similar thing going on with the track, a similar thing going on with the signaling. But then surely there's some of the data that relates to the train that is relevant to the track and vice versa. And so it's this connection between twins that can then unlock more data, unlock more value. But what we see that connects them is shared data. That's at the core of this. And if we like the idea of sharing data within one organization, like I've drawn here, then you can also imagine that same kind of sharing happening across different parts of the transport sector. So between the rail network and the road network and air. It's the same concept though. It's data being shared across organizational boundaries. And then we can scale it up again and think about data that is appropriately shared between sectors. I already mentioned electric vehicles and asking where does transport end and energy start. It clearly makes sense to be able to share data and minimize the friction of data sharing between those sectors. And so here we have this concept of connecting digital twins. It's not just that individual digital twins will be of great value with individual purposes that will benefit individual organizations, but we can see that connecting digital twins up and creating this ecosystem of digital twins has the potential to unlock even more value across the economy. And so when it comes to the national digital twin, we're not saying that it's one massive twin of everything. That would feel completely impossible. But being able to connect up digital twins and create an ecosystem of connected twins, that feels much more organic. It can grow by business case, and that seems to be something that is entirely achievable. And what it does is boil the problem down to a very simple problem statement. It's really all about secure, resilient data sharing across organizational boundaries. And how do we facilitate that? If we can get that data sharing working, then effectively we can enable the national digital twin. And this is where the information management framework comes in, because the information management framework is entirely focused on enabling that secure, resilient data sharing. And so it might have seemed a bit odd at the beginning when I started talking about a national digital twin, which sounds big and shiny and exciting. And then I talked about information management framework, which sounded really quite boring and it's all about data. But the reality is that some really hard background work needs to be done on sorting out our data. And what that will do is unlock this amazing value at a national level for the national digital twin. And I guess if we look at an ecosystem, somewhere at the heart of it is a cell, kind of a multipliable cell, and effectively it's just a connectable digital twin. And it's from that cell that you can grow a complete ecosystem. I've already touched on a lot of these benefits, and I think given a bit more time, we could dig into these in a lot more detail. But we can imagine unlocking massive value across the whole economy with this kind of approach, with benefits to society coming from these better decisions, improved stakeholder engagement, etc. The benefits to the economy, because what we're talking about here really is improving the performance of infrastructure. It's not just improving the productivity of construction, that's important, but we're talking about improving the performance of infrastructure, which will have a direct connection into big national metrics like GDP and productivity growth. We see benefits to business in that effectively what we're doing here is almost creating a whole new category and a new market within which an awful lot of players can provide value, whether that's products or services relating to digital twins and connecting digital twins. The potential here is huge, but it won't work, we don't think, unless there's some rules that the market follows, and that's really the information management framework. We think we need to set some high-level rules that then unlock a huge amount of value for the market just to get on and do their stuff. But without those common rules, then there's kind of going to be chaos and unhelpful competition that won't actually go anywhere. And then the benefits to the environment around less disruption, less waste, and seeing this maybe as a key enabler of solving systemic problems. And so something like net zero is a system problem that needs a system solution. And so tools like interconnected digital twins can really help in managing the complex trade-offs that will be needed to enable net zero. Net zero will not be achieved by siloed solutions. So we really need to have these kind of interconnected cross-sectoral tools to be able to address that kind of thing. It's a similar argument for addressing resilience. And when it comes to something like the circular economy and starting to see not see waste, but to see resource and multiple life cycles of resources, then clearly that needs interconnections to be considered. So finally, I'd just like to touch on how we're going about this, because I hope that I've outlined quite a grand vision. You can imagine it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have to work on this collaboratively over quite a long period of time to actually unlock the benefits. But the benefits are huge and there to be had. So how are we going to do it? And I think at the heart of the approach is really a very simple model that I've represented here. And that's to bring together the practitioners and the experts. And so we see that in the practitioner community, there's an immense amount of knowledge and skill and ability to develop the kind of things I've been talking about. And what we have done is set up a DT hub, this is a digital twin hub, to be a collaborative web-enabled learning community. We've got a nice little mantra for it, which is to do with learning by doing and progressing by sharing. So what we see is a lot of people playing in this space now and potentially making the same mistakes. So by having a practitioner community where lessons can be shared, that we think will enable us together to move forwards quicker. And this is really bringing the practitioners together. And we see that there are two key bits of output which are going to be valuable from this learning experience. And the first one is to turn the experience into identified good practice and turn that good practice into helpful how-to guidance and turn the guidance eventually into useful standards. So it's not constraining innovation by having standards too early, but it is learning from practice and generating practice-based standards. And then the other thing is turning experience into use cases, turning the use cases into case studies and the case studies into business cases. What I mean by this is that an early adopter can come up with a really useful use case, can have learnt the lessons, written the case study up, and then that case study can be used by organization B to write their business case. And we see that this avoids the catch-22 of business cases where a board might say, well, we're not going to do it until you prove that it works. And well, you can't prove that it works until you invested in it, and then it doesn't go anywhere. So using one organization's experience to help facilitate other organizations' business cases, we think is a very useful thing. So that's all very good down in the practitioner level in the DT hub. But we think the expert group is also really important. And this is about coming up with those high-level rules that enable secure, resilient data sharing. And we don't see that would emerge from the melee of practice. the practitioners. What we think is that there needs to be some expert guidance there, where we are helped out by ontologists and people who understand semantic precision and can help us with making sure that our schema are lined up and are semantically precise. That kind of thing does need expert guidance. And so we think by bringing together the expert community with the practitioner community and having the expert suggestions validated by the practitioner community, that we can move forwards the best. We think if it's one or the other all by itself, then it won't work. So if we had just the practitioners and no expert input, I'm not sure we would get to the high level solution. If we just had the high level solution and no practitioners to adopt it, then it's useless. So it really needs to be the combination. During last year, we brought together a large number of experts in this area and have now got a suggestion as to what that semantic solution would look like. We think it's to do with having a foundation data model which would enable a consistency in data modeling. We think it's to do with having a national reference data library, which would be a federated distributed reference data library, so that we can have a consistent approach to reference data management. And we also think it's about having an integration architecture, which is effectively the pipe work that carries the clean data. Now, it's a suggestion at the moment. It needs to be tested, it needs to be developed. But CDBB are at a place where we're just about to publish these suggestions and open it up for scrutiny and for ideas and for people to feedback. We're not publishing it to say, this is the definitive answer, you have to accept it. We're more publishing it to say, this is what we think it might be. Can you come and help us to see if this is pointing in the right direction? And if it is pointing in the right direction, let's make it work. So my final slide is just to say all of this is being guided by Gemini principles, which again, I would commend to you if you've not seen that document that's come out from CDBB. What this does is establish some values-based principles that can guide us on this journey, because we think that the journey itself will be multi-decade, possibly multi-generational, and the technology will change in that time. But we think that values are likely to be more longer lived, either than the individuals or the technology. So we wanted to be really clear on the values that would guide us. And so we've outlined this in terms of purpose, trust and function. And like I say, I'd commend those to you on this journey. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to some questions later on.